I'm your host, Tara Renze, and I have Dr. Dre Mata on today. Not Dr. Dre, but I think by the end of this, you're going to be loving her as much as many of us love Dr. Dre. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Let's tell the listeners what we're actually going to be talking about to start with. That'd be a good
Mhm.
idea. We're going to be talking about raising kids, parenting philosophies, gentle parenting, mental health amongst our youth. This is such an important subject to me in so many ways. And we are going to be diving in, having a lot of real conversations. Andrea is a mother. She is a clinical child psychologist. She is an author. She is a speaker. And you grew up on the south side of Chicago in some really rough areas. Your family are Mexican immigrants. Like, tell us all about you.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, so I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago in a gang-infested, like 9-block neighborhood. And I had 3 older brothers, and we were a close-knit Mexican family. So like if you came to my parents' house or our house for 4th of July, there's 75 Mexicans like running around, doing fireworks, hopefully not blowing off anyone's fingers or burning anyone. There's cake fights, there's tequila drinking. We're just having a great time. And then when I turned 11 years old, or when I was 11 years old, and my youngest brother, Cisco, was 18, he was actually murdered by someone who he considered a friend. I know. And it just completely rocked our worlds. Like we couldn't understand it. And fast forward 2 years when we went through all of the court proceedings, mostly my parents, because they protected me and my other 2 brothers from all of the nonsense that is court proceedings. And I remember they finally were at the point of sentencing. And the judge looked after I sat in the witness stand and read my impact statement at the age of 13 to tell the murderer like how his choices impacted my life. Then the judge comes back, he takes a deep breath, he looks at my parents and me because my brothers weren't allowed to be in the room because they didn't trust themselves not to inflict harm onto the murderer.
Right.
The judge looks at us and he goes, I'm not sentencing this man to death, not because of moral or professional objections against the death penalty, but because he had a rough childhood. And coming from me, who came from like this idyllic upbringing, it was absolutely devastating and flabbergasting to know that someone's behaviors could be explained by a rough childhood. And that's why I became a psychologist that specializes in the treatment of antisocial and aggressive behavior so that I can prevent other kids who come from rough childhoods from making really terrible and poor choices when they're adults that then impact 11-year-old girls and cause them to lose their best friend.
Oh my gosh. So did this man get locked up? I mean, he was an adult.
He was locked up for 27 years. He got out at 27 years, even though he was sentenced to 80 years, but because of like good behavior and the 50% rule and all of that stuff, he was in prison for 27 years. He got out, it was about 3 years ago. It's approaching about 3 years ago. And then just last year, I got a notification that said he died. So that caused another kind of like big emotional outburst, not outburst, but emotional reaction from my family
I'm
and I.
sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Had you guys ever, and you don't have to answer these questions. I'm just
Nope.
curious. This is, I mean, it's just, you hear about people going through this. It's a different type of grief
Mhm.
than anything I think anyone could experience unless you've gone through this type of grief. Like, was there ever a point where you reached out to him or tried to forgive him or understand what happened?
So we were warned, so like a lot because that's the number one question my family and I are asked is like, why did he do it? And
Right.
we actually never got an explanation. We did know, like, because we were warned, we were told by like some police officers or law enforcement that so they have a recording of his confession. And at one point, I'm pretty sure like my parents were like, we want to see it. And the law enforcements were like, no, you don't. And they're like, and the reason why you don't want to see the confession to understand like why did he do this is because like in it he shows absolutely no remorse for
Hmm.
his behavior at all. And they were like, we think it's going to be more traumatizing than it's going to be like helping
Healing.
and healing. Exactly. And so and I know like he tried, there was one point, and my mom actually hid this from me. I didn't find out until probably like a year or two later, but he actually wrote my mom a letter that was like, he wasn't even explaining everything. He was essentially, because he had an accomplice, like his girlfriend was an accomplice in it, and she got off scot free. He actually wrote my mom a letter trying to convince her to go to the police to try to get his girlfriend in trouble because he didn't think it was fair that he was incarcerated and she wasn't.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
Well, I prayers to your family and having to go through that, and I losing a sibling at that age
Hmm.
over a murder just has to be completely life changing. And obviously, did change your path and what you
Right.
wanted to do. Um, so tell us about how that took you to saying, "Hey, I actually, want to help these kids." That I guess for me, when you told me like they let him off because of his where he grew up, like I personally think that's bullshit. Like I am like, oh
Hmm.
well, that like you can't
Right.
excuse like bad behavior because of someone's upbringing. Like this, and I think this is
Hmm.
where our society has really gone wrong. In fact, I was just watching a reel with my husband about it happened in the inner city just this last week. A kid robbed a house and was shot and killed, and they're like, the family is like, this woman needs to be tried for murder. And they're like, well, he broke into her house and like was
Yeah.
robbing her, and they're like, they said, well, he didn't take anything. I'm like, he still entered the house illegally. And this woman,
Hmm.
and now they're like, well, like even the family says in this thing, they're like, well, how else they need to understand where he grew up. Like, how else was he going to get his clothes? And I'm like, wow, okay, this is where we've crossed the line of like
Yeah.
excusing criminal activity because, well, it's just how they were raised.
Well, I think, Tara, we're starting to see this more often. I remember when I was still a college professor. So I was a college professor for 9 years. And I remember, like, I think it was like my second or my third year at the university, I wanted to do, because I was starting to notice this trend of like the younger generation, like Gen Z, like kind of younger millennials, Gen Z, lacking coping skills that they needed in order to like thrive and succeed in all of the things, right? Overcome obstacles, be adaptable. And so I wanted to train some of my psychology majors to go into middle schools and high schools and deliver coping skills training for these students, right? And so I meet with this principal of a middle school, and I'm sitting down with her and I'm like talking to her about like what I want to do, and that I want to have this partnership and I want to offer up free programming and free education because we'll go through a grant and all of those things. And she stops and she looks at me, and this is like back in like 2014, 2015, so like 10 years ago. And she looks at me and she goes, "Well, do you know that we're a trauma-informed school?" And I was like, "You're a what?" And she's like, "We're a trauma-informed school." And then she's like, "Do you know what that means?" And I was like, "I have no idea what that means."
I have
And
no idea
she's,
what that means.
"Oh, wait, it gets better." So she's like, "Okay, so," she's like, "if an eighth grader tells the bus driver to F off, we're not going to give him a consequence. We're simply going to assume that he told the bus driver to F off because he witnessed his dad shooting up the night before and he was traumatized from it, and he's taking it out on the bus driver. And we're not going to
Oh
give him
my
any
Lord.
consequences." And I just sat there and I was like, and in my head, I'm like, I can't partner with this. Like, I cannot. And this is what we're starting to see this in more and more schools, this trauma informed education.
Hmm. And for you, coming from literally the most traumatic thing that could happen
Hmm.
to someone, which is a murder of a family member, that is justified action of like, well, that's just how they were raised. It's just who they are. It's where they lived.
Hmm.
It's where they grew up. Now, I did not. I was fortunate. I grew up in a loving community,
Hmm.
a small community in Kansas where we didn't have crime. We didn't. I mean, literally, we didn't have a we didn't even have a police force. Like we grew up in this really small town.
Yeah.
We didn't lock our doors. Like we literally were so fortunate to grow up like this. But I was also raised in the heart of America by a small community where everyone worked. Like there were no there were no like people who just didn't work, or, I mean, we had like work ethic, respect.
Mhm.
The thing that's like frowned upon, everyone's like, oh, don't ever say children are to be seen and not heard. My dad used to say that. Now, I will say that he didn't ever say it in a negative way. It was basically
Mhm.
like, look, I'm going to allow you to come into adult situations, but these are adult things, and the focus is not on you. So if you need me, you're going to come find me and talk to me. It wasn't like children should never have their voices heard. It was like, when you're in public with me, you're not the main character.
Right. And I think like that's something that I learned when in my Mexican upbringing, like when we would go down to Mexico, we would visit like all of the family. People are like, oh, you went to like Punta Cana and all these places. I was like, no, like we went to like actual like central
Oh my
Mexico with
God.
like ranches
I
and
apologize
cows.
for our people. They're like, I've been to
And
Cabo.
and I'm like, no, not at all. And I remember like we would go and we would like you wouldn't go to like a resort, like you would just go to family members' houses. And there's a
Hmm.
word in Spanish called platicando, which means like talking. Like we're just chatting, we're just talking. And I remember like going to like my elderly relative's house and my dad, because he was like the patriarch in his family, and they would be platicando for like hours on end. And the expectation was for me just to kind of sit there and like listen to what the adults were talking about. And yes, like have a little bit of toys here and, drink some, Mexican Coke, which is way better than Coke in the States. But like that's what we were expected to do. And
Right.
I think we're starting to lose that. Kids are not getting those experiences because we're trying to have children be the center of our worlds instead of kids witnessing and us modeling how it is to be an adult.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we see this everywhere now, from grocery stores to schools to little league games, to even restaurants. Where
Mhm.
you're at a really nice restaurant, and the person next to you's got three kids with them, and they're completely okay letting the kids be the center of the restaurant. And it's like, hey, like, I hired a babysitter.
Mhm.
I mean, just so you know, I took my kids out a lot, but I didn't take them to the
Yeah.
fine restaurants in town. Like, it was
Right.
like, hey, if you want, I'm all for taking kids out to eat. We took our kids
Mhm.
out once a week because we wanted to model, how do you go out to eat? My husband used to get so pissed because he'd be like, this is the biggest waste of $50 every week, because one of the kids would have a meltdown, and this
Mhm.
was early on when they were really little. I mean, we were taking our kids out to eat from the time they were infants all
Mhm.
through, because I was like, I want our children to know how to act in a restaurant. I want to teach them manners, table
Mhm.
conversations. We're not on phones. We're not going to be, they could have their little coloring pad or whatever.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it's one of the things that we taught our kids at a very young age was how to go out how to eat in a restaurant as an adult.
Mhm.
But we did it at, the local, burger joints or Mexican places or wherever, where, it
Yeah.
wasn't a huge deal if they were. But there are so many people these days that they do think their kids should be the center of the universe. And I believe that your kids can be the center of your world,
Right.
but they're not. They need boundaries and love and all that. So I cannot wait to get into all this with you. As you know, I'm an emotional intelligence practitioner.
Mhm.
I've studied emotional intelligence literally my whole life. I didn't get certified in it until like 2017.
Okay.
But I worked in sales and sales leadership, and it really was the cornerstone of what we used to create the best sales reps, which was, how do we teach them accountability, empathy, assertiveness, self-awareness, self-regard, interpersonal relationships, impulse control, like all those things that would go into like, how do you make a great professional salesperson? And it always
Right.
came back to emotional intelligence. And so it's something that I just have always used in my life. So it definitely was the cornerstone of how I raised my children. We used Jim Fay Love and Logic was like our,
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Love and
Yeah.
Logic, but it worked so well with my kids because it's literally emotional intelligence for young children, of like getting them to understand how their actions result in consequences and what they're allowed and not allowed to do. And it was really brilliant. And people to this day are like, oh my gosh, I really would love to hear you talk more about parenting, because I have two teenage boys who are I mean, I'm going to brag on them because they're great kids. They are
Hmm.
accountable. They are responsible. They have very wonderful conversations with adults. The way they carry themselves, they're kind. They're outgoing. But there's no bullshit of like excuses or them getting away with stuff. And I say we didn't use gentle parenting, but we were very strict, gentle parents
Hmm.
that we're accepting with
Right.
love. And I think that this is where this pendulum in our country has swung so far of like hard nosed parenting, of
Hmm.
like the whip and like the switch. Like,
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I remember my mom, she never used the switch, but I remember her like going and getting a switch off of the weeping willow tree and being
yeah.
like, don't make me use this on you. Now, she never used it. I remember one time my brother's like, you've never actually used that. And she was like, puffed up a little bit. But so we went from that to like,
Hmm.
this, oh my gosh, tell me how you're feeling. What does this
Hmm.
mean? What can I do for you? What do you need? Like, and the kid doesn't even know what they need.
No, they don't. They have no idea. Yeah, like I always talk about it, like we've gone from what I call like militant parenting, like my way or the
Yes.
highway,
Yeah.
and then we swung all the way to the other side. And this is like the gentle parenting where it's like I'm going to validate your emotions, and emotions and your feelings are the most important thing. And if you don't feel like doing that, no, honey, you don't have to do that. And which is causing tons of
Oh
issues
God.
later on into the teenage years. I have stories. And it's like, why can we not settle in this middle happy medium ground called authoritative parenting, which, like, yeah, love and logic is an example of authoritative parenting. I always use the words like high expectations within the context of the warm and fuzzies, but like developmentally, like research wise, this authoritative parenting style leads to the best developmental outcomes. Similar to what you're saying, like the kids that are
Mm-hmm.
socially responsible, they're accountable, they don't have excuses, they use please and thank you, they can be independent, all of the things that we want our kids to have. It's authoritative parenting, but for some reason we've swung all the way over here, and I'm like, okay, can we just come back? And I think we actually are. Ever since I've taken this stance against gentle parenting, I'm starting to see kind of more and more people talking out against gentle parenting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's what's really interesting is I feel like so I'm 48. My kids
Hmm.
are 16 and 18, basically. Gentle parenting, people weren't really doing it when I was raising kids. This is something that's even come to the forefront, even more so, I think, in the last 10 years. Even more so than it was. I mean, we would laugh about like, oh, something would happen and they'd be like, we have a bunch of puppies at this school, which I love puppies. I love to hold puppies, but like, that's not teaching kids coping skills. Like,
Correct.
like there's going to be times in your life where there isn't going to be a damn puppy around to help you settle down. And so I do think it's crazy to me how we've swung this far.
Hmm.
Um, I had a guy on my podcast recently, his former Marine, and we were talking about, parenting and kids and like who does well in the military and how then they do well in jobs because they have been held accountable and
Hmm.
accountability, but because they've been held accountable, they've become leaders. They know
Yeah.
what's expected of them. They want to they want to win. They want to make a difference. And he was saying that, this accountability is really like one of the highest forms of love and empathy that we can give someone. It's like, hey, I want to hold you accountable for this. Like, I want you to do this. And we've lost sight of that for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I had this conversation a lot with my clients who are parents. And I tell them, I'm like, if you let your child get away with everything, if you give them everything that they want, like you're not doing them any favors. You're actually doing a significant disservice to them because you're not preparing them to be an adult and you're not allowing them to learn how to cope with things that are going to come their way. Because if you try to put them in this bubble, like, oh, the world is not a bubble. Like, their future employers aren't going to care about whether or not they're having, big emotions. Like, they just want to know that you're going to be able to get the task done that they need to get done so to meet their bottom line.
Right. Well, I also think it's that we are not teaching children how to regulate and understand what their emotions mean. I always, as emotional intelligence practitioner, I'm like, look, emotions are data. They're
Hmm.
not even facts. Like, we can be feeling things that aren't even true sometimes. Like, right? I mean, that's what emotions do, because
Hmm.
our mind spins ideas, it spins thoughts, it spins all this stuff, which then ignite emotions. But
Hmm.
80% of our thoughts are actually negative, unvalid,
Hmm.
biased, untrue. But if we don't learn how to like delineate, like, is this actual truth? And here's the
Hmm.
thing, kids, their emotions are not regulated anyway. I, as an adult, I have to work hard sometimes to regulate my emotions. So trying to ask a kid about their emotions and how they're feeling, they just want to feel safe. And I
Right.
think what's happened is when we over gentle parent, they actually don't feel safe. They
Right.
feel more confused, and they don't even know what it means, because they're so out of control that they're actually looking for that adult to be like, help me. Help me
Hmm.
feel safe.
Right, because like I know like the phrase like you're okay, like you're fine right now with this gentle parenting nonsense is getting a lot of flack. And I'm like, "No, but that's what your kids want. That's what your kids need at that moment is to know that they
Right.
are okay, that they are fine, and that they are safe." Just yesterday,
Mhm.
I volunteered at my kids' field day, and I was at the activity, the station where like one little kid throws a football or a beanbag to the other kid, and they have to try to catch it. Well, there's a second grader, right? And
We
she
did
has a
that with raw
broken.
eggs back in the day, just so you know.
That would have been,
Yeah,
yeah.
it
We
was
had
raw
water
eggs back
balloons.
in the day. Now they do bean bags. This is much gentler already.
But like, so there was this little girl and she had a broken arm, and so she had a cast on, right? And I was on like the part where I'm like trying to teach them like how to catch a ball, right? And so she's like getting ready to catch, and the other mom, Amy, asks the kid like, do you want a beanbag or do you want a football? And the little girl's like, I want a football. And so she tosses the football at this girl with a broken arm, and it just nails her in the face. And I'm like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she just kind of like looks at me, and I've never seen this girl in my life before. And she just kind of looks at me, and then she just wraps her arms around my waist and starts crying. And I just pat her back as if she was my own child. And I was like, "You are okay. You are okay. You are fine. We are going to get you through this. Like, do you want?" And then the teacher came over and was like, because the teacher, like, again, I'm like, as a clinical child psychologist, I have like a no hugging kind of rule just because of like boundaries,
Right.
and I don't want to lose licensure. So I was like, this kid that I
Right.
don't know, I'm now hugging, like, and the teacher finally came over and was like, do you want an ice pack, honey? And she's like, yeah. But I was just like, all she needed at that moment was to know that an adult was
She
like,
was
you're
safe.
okay. She was
Yeah.
safe. She was fine. But I think like these phrases that make kids feel safe are kind of getting bad reps right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have boys, right? Rough and tumble boys. And
Hmm.
you know what they almost always did? Just, so you know, gentle parenting, I didn't even hear this is something new to me. I saw it on a TikTok reel like a few years ago. And I was like, what the hell is this? When they're like, oh, don't tell them that you're proud of them. I'm like, wait, what? We're not supposed to tell them that we're proud. It was so confusing to me. I had to look it up. But what would happen with my boys is they
Hmm.
would they would get hit in the head with a ball or whatever.
Yeah.
What the first thing they always did was they looked at me,
Yeah.
and I just wouldn't react. I would just look at him. I'd be like, "You're okay.
Yeah.
You're okay." And then if they
Right.
started crying, I'd be like, "Come here. Come here." Like that had to be scary.
Mhm.
Like, you're okay? Like you're tough, right? Like,
Right.
and then obviously there were times where if something was serious, I mean, we've been to the emergency room. It's not like we were like,
Right.
like back in my day, they'd be like, just give her a couple ibuprofen.
Just
She needs to go
run
to the
some dirt in
hospital.
it.
Yeah, we actually joke. Like I have like, you're, Gen X, when your parents, like you got hit in the head, you clearly had a concussion. And they were like, if you're still feeling bad in the morning, we'll take you. like, okay, we're not advocating that either. But
Right. No.
they would always look at me. They wanted to know
Mhm.
my reaction. So if
Yeah.
I reacted, of like, oh my God, and then
Mhm.
was like asking them if they're okay, they're certainly not going to be okay because I'm freaking out. And
Mhm.
that is way too much for a 5-year-old's little nervous system and emotional to regulate. They have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, so like what we're talking about, it's called social referencing. So when kids are in unfamiliar situations, they're going to look to their trusted adults, their caregivers, to figure out like how should they proceed with this new environment. And so like when they're injured, which is a completely new environment, unless they're, accident prone, those kind of things, they're looking to us as their parents to tell them that they're okay. And like,
Hmm.
it's not belittling them. It's not like minimizing their feelings. You're simply telling them that they are safe and that they are okay and that they will survive.
Right, right.
Mhm.
It's interesting. My oldest son plays baseball, and it's a thing where if you get hit with the ball, you run as fast as you can to the base. And if they like these, but these kids have not obviously not been gentle parented. And I mean, there's
Mhm.
a toughness that comes with sports. And I think you learn, like kids do learn a
Mhm.
lot through playing in sports when the parents are on the sidelines and they're not involved in the game. Like kids
Mhm.
learn a lot about that and
Yep.
emotional regulation and,
Mhm.
powering through and when is something really wrong with their body versus like, hey, that's smarted or whatever it
Mhm.
is. But, it is really interesting how what's happening with the over exaggeration of emotions and then kids not being able to regulate them. And it's like, I don't even know how we're going to recover from it because these are then going to be the kids raising. I feel like we just keep like, how come we can't get this right?
So I think what you're talking about is ever since COVID and because of like the gentle parenting movement, we're starting to see an uptick in OCD. And
Hmm.
one view of OCD is that the child doesn't, or the individual doesn't trust themselves and their body to like know what is going on in the environment. And so then they develop like these anxieties and these compulsions and these obsessions to tell them that they're not safe, when in reality, they are safe. And so
Hmm.
I think we need to, how to kind of stop this is first, we need to stop the gentle parenting nonsense. We need to parent using high expectations within the context of the warm and fuzzies. And then we also need to start going into high schools. We need to start to go into colleges and start really helping those students develop what I call like adaptability skills so that they're ready for the workplace.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we kind of need to
I
prepare workplaces because this is coming. It's already there. Workplaces, I mean, there's a research study that came out that said 60% of businesses have fired a Gen Z employee within months of hiring them because they don't know how to behave, they don't know how to dress, they lack motivation, they can't communicate, and they have no initiative. And so we also need to be
right.
going in, helping, managers, executives, those people, the leaders of the company realize, okay, how can we set these individuals up for success, because it's not their fault and we can't
Hmm.
just lay down and like blame them, but we do need to learn how to, or bring people in to teach them how do we get them to be successful in the workplace.
Right. Hey, it's Tara here, and I am so excited to let you know that the second edition of my book, Be Who You Came to Be, is officially on pre-sale. I originally self-published the book, and now a publishing house has picked up the book, and I'm so excited and so honored that this book will be available in bookstores across the country. However, you don't have to wait till it gets into the bookstore to get your copy. You can go to my website and sign up for your very own pre-sale book, which includes new secrets, new emotional intelligence takeaways to help you step into your authenticity and be exactly who it is that you came to be. Look, you don't need a self-help book to help you fix what's broken. You're not broken. You just need to become more of who you already are. It's why I poured my heart into this book, and I am so excited that a copy is waiting for you. Head over to my website now and get your copy. So, as you know, you're on the Be Who You Came to Be podcast. This is my message. It's my mantra. And for me, it means being the very best version of the person that we were put on this earth to be, the exact person that we were meant to be. And it was a note that my grandmother wrote to my infant son the week he was born. It was her life's advice: be who you came to be. So it became my North Star for parenting of like, it is my duty by my grandmother, who did an amazing job raising children, that my goal is to help him be who he came to be, not who I want him to be, not who his dad wants him to be, not who the world wants him to be, but really finding this out. And how do we discover that? We discover it through mistakes. We discover it through failure. We discover it through figuring out how we navigate different things. And I think that that's the real problem with what's happened to so many of youth is we've tried to protect them, but by overprotecting them, we've actually we've stalled them, we've hurt them, we've made it harder for them, versus teaching them the real life skills that we need to be who we came to be. And I think that any adult can say that they loved it. We like it when someone has high expectations of us. Because why does someone have a high expectation of you? Because they believe in you, because they love you, because they see your potential. They are like, look, I have high expectations of you because you've got everything it takes. I always say no one ever expects more of you than they know that you can give. And I believe this is a truth in everything in life. Your coaches, your teachers, your parents, like no one will ever expect more of you than they absolutely know that you can give. They wouldn't expect someone in a wheelchair to walk. They're not going to, that's a ridiculous expectation, an unrealistic expectation. So, and my boys to this day, their favorite coaches were the ones who pushed them, who believed in them beyond reason, who was like, hey, is that your best?
Right.
Can you do better? Like, I think you can do better. I think you need to work a little harder. And you know what? Sometimes it pissed them off. They would be like, but then they actually took a little bit of time to reflect. They took a little bit of time to think about it. And they're like, deep down, they're like, yeah, he's right. She's right. I can do better.
Right. And I like, as you're talking, Tara, it's like making me think back to like when I used to play softball. And I remember I had these coaches and they were way harder on me and my friend Jenna compared to everyone else on the team. And like one day I asked my coaches and they're like, because you're the better ones on the team and we expect more out of you. So we're going to be harder on you. And then I remember when I was in graduate school and I was meeting with my mentor, his name's Manfred. He's from the Netherlands. And I was meeting with him about like my master's thesis idea. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And he looks at me in his like thick Dutch accent and he goes, my grandmother could have come up with a better idea than that. And I remember, and he starts going off about like how his 11-year-old nephew could come up with a better idea. And I remember being like, really like caught off guard because I was like, no, like I think this is a great idea. He's like, no. And then like, as he kind of gave me a little bit of guidance, I then went to the track and I just ran and ran and ran. And as I was processing the emotions from being told that a grandmother could come up with a better idea than I did as a graduate student, I came up with the idea for my master's thesis. And I went and I emailed him and he's like, now you're thinking like one of my graduate students. And that actually ended up being my master's thesis. And so it's like those moments where it's like, but had he not done that, and maybe he could have done it in a different way, but it was the way that was true to him. And so and we worked well together. And even now him and I have a great relationship. And so I think that's what I needed to hear at that moment, that I sucked and I could do way better.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the truth hurts, but if we actually can figure out how to filter, when I tell the story that when I started off about with my Be Who You Came to Be, and I took it to market after seeing like how people really love the message. Like when I would say Be Who You Came to Be to someone, it changed how they felt about themselves. I mean, most people have never really thought about that. Like, wow, I actually have a lot of purpose and I am a single individual. I mean, it's a very profound, thought-provoking, simple sentence. And it changed the way they approach relationships, how they felt about themselves. And I took it to this guy and he is like, look, I love this message. He's like, I actually think it's it's memorable. It's got a lot of legs. Like you could take the story. He's like, I got to tell you though, you're really ordinary. Like, I don't know if you're the right person to deliver the message. He's like, but, and you know what?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to actually process what he was saying. But what he was saying actually gave me of like, yeah, and that's why the world needs this message, because most people feel ordinary. And like, how do we let people know that ordinary is okay? And we still have a lot of power in our ordinary. And just because I'm not a Fortune 500 executive or have climbed Mount Everest doesn't mean I don't matter. But it was sometimes those really like just gut-wrenching truths. I mean, I was ordinary. Like it wasn't a lie.
Right.
And it sucked at the time, and it was still a shitty thing to say, I think. But with that, it gave me the determination of like, yeah, I'm ordinary, but I matter and everyone else matters, which is really the heart of this message. And he was right. It was going to take longer than if I had some big splashy resume with whatever. And, I was capable of doing that. And I was so determined. And, I guess if I would have been gentle parented, I probably would have just quit.
Right.
I would have been like, well, he said I don't, versus like really thinking about what it means, because the world is going to take you down. Like there's not going to be a gentle parent there to help you throughout your entire life. And, I would just love for the listeners to know, because we've been here just like talking about like why we disagree with gentle parenting. And again, I don't think it's about not being gentle. You can be a gentle, loving parent and still, like, I'll give you an example. So my son, when my youngest son, he, well, you've got a 6-year-old and 8-year-old. You're in the heart of like a backpack full of art and home and papers and crafts and like all the stuff. And so my son, he would do this like in first grade or whatever. He'd come home and he'd just dump his backpack out on the counter. So I went through it all one day and I threw it in the trash. And he came in and opened up the trash, and of course, like came over to me and was like tears in his eyes and was so upset that I threw his stuff away. And I was like, oh my gosh, Jack, first off, I was like, I did not know that this was so important to you, just dumped it on the counter. So I figured that you didn't really care about it because, you didn't come to me and talk to me about it. So I went through it and I just tossed it. I didn't know it was so important to you. And of course he was like sniffling. I'm like, okay, well, here's what we can do. We can get it out of the trash and we can go through it. And you can tell me what you're proud of. And then what you're proud of, we'll put on the refrigerator. And we'll just make this our new way of doing things. Like we'll go through your stuff. If it's your best work and you're proud of it, it gets a spot on the fridge. If not, it's trash. Now he was like, cool. I actually kind of like this. And it was really interesting what happened was because I would be like, are you proud of this? Yeah. Is it your best work? No, it's not my best work. Okay. Well, are you proud of this? Yeah. Okay. Well, which one is better? Why? And really getting him to start think about what he was doing versus just coddling the hell out of him and then apologizing because I made a mistake and I, hurt his feelings and how does that make him feel and all that. Instead it was like, hey, let's learn from this and grow from this. And it's been really interesting. And we use Are You Proud of That for everything. I mean, he didn't do well on a test this year. And he put it in our family chat. He's like, hey, I just want you guys to know that I totally bombed this test. And my oldest son writes back, thanks for the heads up. thanks for the heads up. And I was like, okay, well, we can talk about it. And I was like, are you proud of it? He's like, no, I'm not proud of it. I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Like, what are you going to do about it? And you know what? He started going into school early. He took full accountability for it. And, he's like, and next year, I guarantee you, I'm not going to be taking any core subjects in the afternoon because I'm playing baseball and they pull us out of school all the time. I mean, it was all these like learning things of just like him figuring it out on his own, which I feel like is where we've gotten so far from. So that's just my example of how I have parented. What are some other ways that people can kind of get away from the quote unquote gentle parenting and actually start making a positive impact with their children's emotional stability and how their self-regard and how they feel about themselves?
So one thing that I talk about is I talk a lot about natural consequences. So letting your children learn from their mistakes that they made. So just yesterday, I make pancakes for my kids pretty much every morning. My oldest daughter loves pancakes, and so I made her pancakes, and then I went upstairs to do something, and because she spreads her own peanut butter and she cuts it and does the syrup, all the things, and I was upstairs, and all of a sudden I heard her wailing. And before I had left, I had seen that she had the plate somewhat off the counter. And I could have
Ugh.
easily told her, like, hey, push the plate on the counter. But I was like, nope, I'm not going to. Not going to steal her learning opportunity. So I went upstairs.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, I hear bawling downstairs. My youngest comes up and she's like, "Hey, Charlotte like dumped her pancakes on the floor." And I was like, "Yeah, I got that idea already." And so I walk in and my daughter's all upset. So I gave her a hug and I'm like, "You're okay." And I'm like, "What did you learn?" And she looks at me and she's like, "To not have the plate hanging over the side." And I was like, "Exactly. So next time, what are you to do?" She's like, "I'm going to make sure my plate is all the way on the counter." And I didn't steal that from her. I didn't shame her. I didn't make her feel bad. I, acknowledged her feelings and then we learned from it. So I think that's one big thing that parents can be doing is using natural consequences, helping them learn what can they learn from those mistakes because everyone's going to make mistakes. That's another phrase that we use in our household. Is it okay to make mistakes in this family or is it allowed to make mistakes in this family? And all our kids are like, yes, it is. Because I think
Mhm.
like a lot of gentle parents, they say that they're okay with mistakes, but then like their kid does something and then like they get, kind of low key shamed for it. And it's not in the best interest of the kids.
Mhm. Mhm. My grandmother always said, "It's only a mistake if it happens twice. The first time you
Hmm.
just needed to learn that lesson."
Yeah.
And man, I've learned some hard ass lessons in my life where it
Hmm.
hurt,
Yeah.
and it was the hard way to learn it. But that's how we grow. And it's also
Mhm.
that the personal accountability and responsibility of like, you can't rescue them.
Right.
What about from like a school parent student aspect? Because I know we're seeing a lot of this. I grew up from a family of educators. Both my mom, her
Yep.
sister, my uncle, they were all educators. My brother's a music educator to this day. And my mom, towards the end of her tenure as a teacher, it was a struggle for her because
Mhm.
the parents were constantly in her classroom.
I think the big thing is with parents. So there's a few things. So I want teachers and educators, and they're kind of stuck right now because they're stuck between the administration and the parents. So I want parents
Hmm.
to be working with teachers and hearing teachers out. But I also want administrators and teachers to be using logical consequences. So using if a child behaves in a way, the consequence should be related to helping that child learn the skills that they need to do that behavior better or in a different way. So, for instance, in the fall semester, my twins are there in the same classroom. They came home and told me that there was a little boy and he threw a shoe. He took off his shoe and he threw it at the music teacher. And the consequence for this little boy was he just had to look at the teacher and say, "I'm sorry." And that was it. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then a few
Oh
weeks
my
ago,
God.
my son, when I picked him up from school and he was off, and I was like, "Hey, like, are you okay?" And he's like, "So and so, same kid, punched me in the face repeatedly during recess." And I was like, "Okay, do you want me to ask the teacher for some more information?" And he was like, "Yes." So I like email his teacher. First of all, his teacher didn't even know what had happened. She got additional information, and yeah, it was the same boy. And they had him sit out for 10 minutes during recess. And I was like, "Oh, can we talk about like logical consequences?" So obviously, this kid has poor emotion regulation. Can we have him sit down instead of having him sit down and sit out of recess for 10 minutes? Can we have the school counselor come in and teach him emotion regulation skills? Can we have them teach him how to act appropriately with peers? Can we teach him skills instead of just having him sit out for recess? So really like using consequences that are related to the behaviors that they are struggling with, because a lot of the behaviors are just skill deficits and they need to
Mhm.
learn those skills in order to improve and succeed and to thrive.
Yeah. I remember one time my oldest son, he was we worked really hard with him on emotional intelligence, impulse control, understanding he was not his thoughts. Like, just because you think
Mhm.
something doesn't mean you should do it. He was the kid that every teacher was like, I think you should medicate him for ADHD. I'm like, I'm
Mm.
not medicating him for, he's not,
Yeah.
I've studied this. He does not need ADHD medicine. And we went through, a lot of different things, and we end up finding out what worked. One thing that always worked, and the teachers thought I was crazy, but I was like, please put him in a leadership position, give him a lot of responsibility in the classroom, make him the kid who
Mhm.
hands out papers, put him in the front of the room. I was like, because two things are going to happen. One, he is the kid who does not want to disappoint you. Now, if you
Mhm.
start shaming him and putting him in the back of the room,
Right.
and he will continue to act up. He will. If you put him in a leadership position, he won't let you down. And two, don't be afraid to discipline him. If he does
Right.
something that is not right. I remember one time I was like, "Well, can you have him just go sit out in the hall for 5 minutes?" And they were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
you can't sit out in the hall anymore." I was like, "Oh,
Oh.
okay, you can't sit out in the hall." I was like,
Mhm.
not even right by the door. They're like, "Oh no, because that's very shameful for the kid." I'm like, "Well,
Mhm.
yeah." I remember being out in the hall, being like, "Peace, I'm out in the like, um, but so I get that there's some things they can and cannot
Right.
do, but ultimately what happened is Ben was held accountable, and
Mhm.
here's what we started telling him was, look, if you get in trouble at school and I hear about it from the school before I hear about it from you,
Yep.
we're going to have a big issue at home. Now, if you mess up at school and something happens and you come to and tell me, then we're going to be okay. Like, we will figure out a way to work through this because you're being accountable, you're being honest, like everyone makes mistakes, and we'll figure out what we need to do to right the ship. And I think that accountability on his actions of and him knowing that, like, I wasn't going to completely blow a head gasket on him whenever he would tell me what happened. I mean, it was always a very logical conversation about whatever he did and why, whatever was happening. Anyway, long story short, Ben, he really had to work on self-regulation, impulse control,
Mhm.
understanding his emotions, which I have to tell you, the kid today is gold. He's the one I was telling you earlier that is the one that's the glue of the relationships. He is highly responsible. He has full accountability. He's a great student. He takes care of his relationships. He is, he's hard on himself, but in a good way. He still has enough of an ego that, sometimes we have to check him a little bit on that, but just an overall, like, amazing human being.
Yeah.
Never medicated, self-regulated. Was it hard as a parent? Yeah, it was hard. I remember one time the school called and this lady was just going off on my kid. And I just got off the phone. I cried. I'm like, God, this woman really does not like my son.
Right.
And we worked closely with her on how to help navigate Ben. And guess what? He became one of her favorite students ever. And she
Oh.
became one of his favorite teachers ever because they figured it out. And then, it was like a mutually, uh, you know, way that they worked together, and
Mhm.
she did hold him accountable.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's a huge thing is to hold kids accountable because they do so much better when we hold them accountable.
mhm, mhm. I used to make my kids. They get so pissed at me. Um, I would make them write an apology letter to the teacher if they
Mhm.
got in trouble for being disrespectful or rude. I'm like, look, you did it. It was a
Mhm.
mistake. You're going to take accountability for it, and you're going to just. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to need to write the teacher an apology letter.
Yep.
Nobody else has to do this. I'm like, well,
Nope.
I'm not their mom.
Yep.
I'm like, but you know what?
Mhm.
This is the way that you can show the teacher that, one, you recognize what you did, and two, you're held accountable for it, and three, you're not going to do it in the future because you're going to put it in writing. And you know what?
Yeah.
They would have to write it on their own and come up with it, and that kind of stuff works.
Yeah. Like I had my 6-year-old write because I think she was 5, she was doing speech therapy, and for some reason she just got really comfortable with her speech pathologist, and she like stuck her tongue out on her, and I was like, like we do not do
Yeah.
this, and so she had to write an apology letter, to her speech pathologist.
Yeah. I know I remember one person was like, that's just shaming your kid and making him feel bad. I'm like, no, it's not. Like
Nope.
we apologize when we mess up. We take a
Yeah.
responsibility. And, I think that learning how to apologize that is a learned skill. Not, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry I made you feel that way. Not,
Right.
I'm sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry I did that.
Right. And I think it has to come with behavior change, because if it doesn't come with
Yes.
behavior change, it's just lip service. And what's the point of just
Mm-hmm.
saying that then?
Right, right,
Hmm.
right. So let's shift gears to something a little bit heavier because I know you work with kids from all ages. And, one of the things that is a huge concern of mine, because we have been directly impacted by this, is suicide. And we have had just in the last, it started, my brother in law committed suicide in 2018, I think, 2018. And then since then, I've had one of my best friend's fathers committed suicide, a man down the road from us who has teenage boys, highly successful man, took his life. There's been multiple suicides in our high schools. And then just this last year, 2 young boys that we knew took their lives. And I think what's really scary for me, especially with the young children, these young kids, is it's happening more frequently. It's not following the old rhetoric of being bullied or problems. Like these kids they are the most loved. These kids are the popular kids. They've come from loving families, and so whatever we're doing is not working. And I really want to speak out more about this. And I'm honestly scared too, because I'm not trained. I have no education in this, but for me, I'm like, I need to create platforms to bring trained people like you who are highly educated in child psychology, like what's going on, to talk about where we need to make sustainable, positive change that will save lives.
Yeah. So, Tara, it's interesting that you brought this up because when I was in grad school, my mentor that I was talking about earlier, Manfred, he decided we were going to collaborate with these like 2 leading suicide researchers because and they wanted to look at what happens when violence, like the mass shooters, die by suicide. So we were looking at the co-occurrence of violence and suicide. And so we teamed up with these 2 leading suicide researchers, and he assured us, he's like, I'm not going to take the lead on this grant. We're going to write this massive $1 million grant, but I'm not taking the lead. And then all of a sudden one day he walks into our office and he's like, you two, my lab mate and I, he's like, y'all are going to be real pissed at me. And we're like, what did you do? And he's like, I took the lead on the grant. And we're like, ah. We're like, what does this mean for us? And he's like, well, Andrea, you have to read a stack of suicide, like this big, of suicide research on gender differences, like males versus females. And Liz had to read like a huge stack on age. And they're like, you have 2.5 weeks to read all of this, and then we have to write a grant. Well, we actually got the $1 million. It was close to $1 million. It wasn't exactly $1 million, but that ended up forcing me into being a suicide researcher. And then I had to become like a suicide certified like person. If there's a suicide in a high school, like I would go in and like educate them and help with grief and like help the school like not perpetuate and have more suicides on their hands, those kind of things. And so fortunately, I know a lot about suicide. And I think what it comes down to is, because we were looking at, so there's this well-known psychologist, Dr. Joyner, and he wrote the book like Why People Kill Themselves, or something along those lines. And his model looks at like there's 3 reasons why people die by suicide. It's because they feel like they don't belong anywhere. They feel like they are a burden on their loved ones, and they have acquired a capacity to enact lethal harm on themselves. So what does that mean? It just means like suicide is like a build up of things. And so what I talk about when I developed this talk called like Stomp Out Suicide, I talk about we need to make kids feel like they belong, which is really difficult right now because we're in a loneliness epidemic. The second one is we need to help them, and you're going to love this one, feel like they have a purpose, like they are to be who they are meant to be. And then the last one is they need to develop coping skills. And so those are the three things that I encourage parents and schools and coaches to lean into with our youth, because that's what's going to start to stomp out suicide. If we can do those three things, if we can make them feel like they belong, if we give them help them achieve their sense of purpose, and then also if we give them coping skills, we're going to start to see that suicide rate start to go down, because it's out of this world right now.
I just find it so interesting because, you were talking about working with the schools on once a student takes their life, there is a lot of intervention at the schools. One of the things that I have seen at the schools is there's a lot of intervention, but it's very hush hush. It still has that like, well, we don't want to talk about it too much because we don't want to encourage someone else. Like we don't want to celebrate it because we don't want a kid to think like, oh, well, so-and-so got a huge splashy send-off because they killed themselves and I want to do the same thing. But I actually have seen a little bit of the reverse of this happen, that we haven't talked enough about how absolute suicide is. I had my youngest son, he was directly impacted by this the first week of his freshman year. One of the boys in his group of friends took his life. And as time's gone on, the boys have been over and we've talked and his name comes up, and I tell him, like, I guarantee you, if he was here today, and we could talk to him, he would say, I regret doing that.
Yep.
I wish I would have never done this. And, there's the guy who's that survived the Golden Gate Bridge jump. Yes. I was actually at another suicide funeral this year where they played that clip of him. And I really appreciated that the parents for that one were like, don't kill yourself. I mean, they were not afraid to tell this entire congregation of thousands of kids to be like, it's not the answer. It's the end. Like, you're never going to get to kiss a girl, all the things, like go to prom, go to college, like all the experiences. And the fact that they actually had the conversations about how absolute it was, I really appreciated that, because I feel like that is one place that we have been afraid to like have these honest conversations with kids about. There's no coming back.
Right. There is none. Yeah, because I mean, I've had the finality of it. And I think, if you talk to I think there's like 26, 27 people who have survived the jumping from the Golden Gate Bridge. And all of them will say that as soon as they jumped off the bridge, they instantaneously regretted it. And Kevin his story is perfect. I would encourage anyone, to go out and listen to it. But it's just there's better ways to deal with it. And I think we have a common friend, Zoe, and I was talking to her because I had just got off the phone with this guy who has a suicide mental health foundation. And like, he didn't know any of the research. And I was like, how are these foundations that are like suicide prevention foundations, how do they not know any of the research? I understand that they've been like personally impacted by it, but they don't know what actually prevents suicide. And I'm like, do I need to start like delivering my Stomp Out Suicide talk like more often?
You do.
Because like, these are the things, like making kids feel like they belong, giving them a sense of purpose, and like helping them like know what they were created to do, and teaching them coping skills is what's going to reduce the suicide rate.
I also think we saw with everyone there, it's not like this happened out of the blue. Like there was a lead up to it, there was like, and I think even training the kids of like, hey, if you see something, like you have to come to an adult, like you have to come find someone and be like, this is not normal behavior. And if a kid is threatening it, one of the things that I just have, I think one, because of what's happened with these two young boys, and it's just been so heartbreaking for me. I literally can hardly even talk about it without getting emotional, is just that the youth feels like you have to feel so hopeless Like to be in a situation to do this, like your brain is not working right. Like it's
Nope.
not functioning right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for one reason or the other, however we got here.
Yeah.
But I do feel like just the alignment though of like you said of like giving people purpose, the be who you came to be message is that we all matter. And it's also,
Mm-hmm.
being who we came to be is not this like, walk on a rainbow. Like we have to you're not meant to be happy all the time. Like I go through all these things with my
Mm-hmm.
teachings of like, you need to focus on what's fulfilling, and the fulfilling things are really hard. They're going to push you
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to feel deflated, and you're going to wonder if you can do it, but then you're going to find it in your soul to like go all in. And then it's going to create this epic moment of happiness and success because you did something that was hard. And that's what life is. Like that is what we do on this earth, is hard things and fulfilling things. And I had a lady who had seen me speak and listened to the podcast, and she said that she had a friend, and it's what you just said, that a friend called her and was like, hey, I'm calling you. You're my lifeline right now. I think I'm going to kill myself. And
Yeah.
of course she panicked. She was freaked out. The friend they were not in the same town. It wasn't like she was like, I'm driving over now. We're staying on the phone together. And she said that I actually used the be who you came to be messaging of, who you are, that you matter, and that, you're not your thoughts. And just because you're thinking this doesn't mean you should do it, even though it's that you're in a dark spot. And she's like, I just feel like this message needs to be like, if we could use it to save lives, because she said she talked her friend out of it, and then to get like serious counseling, that maybe, it would make a difference.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is like, yeah, everyone wants to feel like they belong, and I've been in those moments where it's like, hey, this person is thinking about suicide. I remember I was driving home from Columbus, and I had a head coach at a college call me, and she's like, hey, I'm really thinking about, or this one person, this players really thinking about taking their life, I think. I'm really concerned. And so I gave them the exact tools, exactly what to say. And I remember I received a text message at like 10:15 that night. She's like, we're going over there right now. And I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden, like 45 minutes later, I have another text message from them. And they're like, hey, we're going to like the emergency room because she was suicidal. And what she told them was like, because the questions were, are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have a plan, and do you have a means to carry out that plan? And so they looked at their player and they're like, are you thinking about killing yourself? And she's like, yeah, as soon as you guys walk out this door, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to either find a bridge or a wall to drive into. And she was like, oh, okay, well, like, will you be willing to like go to Orchard Hall, which is our suicide like a treatment facility? And she's like, yeah. And now that person, that teenager, that college student, is doing well in her career. And at that moment, she just felt like she had no sense of belonging. She felt like she wasn't part of the team. She felt like she was letting all of her teammates down. But because the coaches had the resources that they needed, they were able to save a life that day.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't imagine the weight of asking someone that question. I think most people
Mm-hmm.
would feel like, oh, we don't want to ask them that, because if we
Yeah.
ask them that, then, but
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. It is a lot. But I think it
Mm-hmm.
saved, those
Mm-hmm.
three questions save so many lives. And I think if we don't ask it, then we run the possibility of losing a life, whereas we could be saving a life. And
Mm-hmm.
and
So
people are
not,
like,
are you having suicidal thoughts? It's, are you going to kill yourself? Like it's that,
mhm,
because I think there's a difference between having a thought, right? A suicidal thought,
yes.
and then being like, no, I'm taking action.
Like, are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
plan, and do you have the means to carry out that plan? If you ask the first one, if they say yes, then you ask the second one. If they say yes to the second one, you ask the third one. And if they say yes to that third one, then it's time to take action and really get them the
Mm-hmm.
help. And you could always call the police and ask for a well check if they're not willing to like go to the ER or something like that, or the ED, whatever it's called in your area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gosh, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like we should have a whole podcast about this, because I think it's so, so important. Because it is on the rise. And I think this loneliness pandemic, but I also do think it goes back into a lot of the stuff that we talked about before, that when people don't have coping mechanisms and they don't like when you're depressed and you're grieving or you're in a dark spot, it's dark. I have been there. I have been in very dark spots of my life where, you know, I remember after my dad died and I was just so depressed and grieving for so long. I remember one time thinking like, if I got, hit by a truck, like, not that I was
Mhm.
going to ever kill myself, but I just remember having like a thought of like, I guess I wouldn't like really care, because
Right.
I was in such a dark spot.
Mhm.
And I think it's so scary to even admit this kind of stuff, but I was emotionally in a spot where I would have never done anything like that. But to even have that thought was like
Mhm.
shocking for me. And I think at some point in time, if you've ever lived long enough and you've gone through grief or heartbreak or hardship or feeling like you don't fit in or that you're not enough or that you don't have purpose or don't matter, like I think every human being has probably at one point in time wondered if life's worth continuing living.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And I think if we don't have those conversations, because I remember there was another time when I was still a college professor and one of the trainers reached out to me and they're like, hey, we think this runner that you have a really good relationship with, like, we're worried that she's suicidal. And I like looked at them and I was like, she's not suicidal. She's experienced like existential like crises at this moment. She's like having like those big questions and those like, what is life? Why am I here? What is my purpose? I'm like, I'm not worried that she's suicidal, but I think she's just having those existential like thinking and those thoughts, and she's okay. And I mean, I just saw her last week, so she was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I've never heard that before. That's what I was going through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
I
Yeah.
think like not a lot of
Gosh.
people know the difference between like what is a suicidal thought versus like what are those existential crises thoughts that people are having. And we need to be able to tease apart because we don't want to cry wolf and say, oh my goodness, this person's suicidal and make them go through all of the things when they're not actually suicidal.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh. Well, I would love to have you back on the show to talk specifically about this. I think it's so important. It really
Hmm.
is impacting our youth. And, the more I think that we can let people know that they matter, they make an
Hmm.
impact, that we all have purpose, every
Yeah.
single one of us. I always use someone as simple as my grandmother who, she wrote this Be Who You Came to Be message at the end of her
Hmm.
life. She died, about 15 months after she wrote the letter. And, it was such a simple thing and it has served so much purpose in my life and in the lives of people globally. She lived in a small town of 350 people and she made a huge impact. And I think it goes back to this whole thing of like, you don't have to, win a Nobel Peace Prize or do something or win a gold medal or be the smartest kid in the class or the fastest runner or the prettiest or the whatever to like
Hmm.
make an impact in this world. Like every single person has purpose and
Hmm.
matters, and how we make other people feel and how we show up is so important. But that all starts with how we feel about ourselves. And it's
Hmm.
back to what we were talking about from the beginning is like, are we raising children to feel like they are capable, that they know how to manage themselves, that they can face adversity,
Hmm.
they understand disappointment as part of life, like all of those human skills that we
Yeah.
need, that are emotional, regulational, that we have to have in life. Because guess what? Life doesn't get any easier.
No.
Like it actually gets harder.
Hmm.
And the big feelings and big emotions get big, big, big. What do they say?
Hmm.
Like little kids, little problems, big kids, big
Big
problems.
problems. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because things I
What
think
are
just
your
get harder.
closing thoughts on everything?
I think we can right this ship if we, like I said, we mentioned earlier, like if we start to parent our youth using high expectations within the context of the warm and fuzzies, and then we start really kind of pouring into our youth and teaching them adaptability skills, the emotion regulation, the how to reach, how to do hard things and, grit, those kind of things. And then if we also are working with the employees or the employers, like the businesses, the corporations, to help them, okay, this is what we're facing. How can we create environments that are really going to help them thrive and then the business thrive?
Mm-hmm. And what role do you play in all that? Do you speak at schools? Do you speak with corporations? I know you're a speaker,
Mhm.
you're an author. Like, tell everyone a little bit about how they can contact you to make an impact with you.
Yeah, so my website is Dr. Dre, so DRDRE, and then Mata, MATA, .com. So Dr. Dre Mata. That's how they can reach me. So yeah, I speak to schools and parenting groups and companies and businesses on how, like, okay, how gentle parenting has essentially created this monster, and this monster of under-equipped Gen Z employees are now entering the workplace, and what can businesses and companies be doing to kind of help them prepare them for, life and workplace, and then also going into schools and kind of trying to prevent the problems that the workplaces are having.
hmm Well, if I can ever partner with you in giving anyone that purpose of we all matter, we're all here
Mhm.
for a reason, being who we came to be, is not unintentional, and it's something that we all make an impact and we all can make a difference. I'd love to make an impact with you in any way, and I just can't thank you enough for coming on the show and having these difficult conversations that are all rooted truly in love. In love.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Well,
thank you so
thank you
much for
so
being on
much.
the show. Yeah, keep shining. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. I know that today it was kind of a heavy topic, but hopefully something resonated with you, something that you could take away. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to shoot us a message. If you're listening on streaming, go check us out on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, go check us out on streaming. Go give Dr. Dre a follow and keep shining. Live unapologetically authentic to exactly who you are and be who you came to be.